My name is Yuriy Krykun. I am a FIDE master with 2 international master norms, and today I'm glad to be presenting to you this new course, which will be devoted to 2 extremely interesting topics, namely calculation and initiative. I think they're obviously very related, because while initiative is less concrete of a thing rather than just tactics, it also involves many other things, such as dynamic understanding, feel for concrete play, the desire and ability to attack the opponent's king, benefit from the momentum, and so on. It heavily relies on calculation. And I think that presenting these two together is a very good idea, because obviously initiative, your ability to handle the initiative well, largely depends on your calculation skills, and at the same time calculation skills would be used way more effectively if you would be willing to strive for positions where you have the initiative, even though very often you would not have a forced win or anything like that. To be honest, even though I was extremely excited to make a course about this topic, I felt that it was quite a challenging one. The reason is not the absence of material or the fact that it's difficult to explain it. The main reason is that calculation, unlike some other skills, unlike some other things in chess, such as opening knowledge or, for example, some endgame course, is the thing you acquire by practicing a lot. And it's not something that you can just watch, that you can see others do and learn yourself. It would be very, very important to do a lot yourself too and practice a lot. Basically, the ability to calculate is just a kind of a muscle for a chess player, and any strong player needs to practice it every single day, or at least very frequently, otherwise he loses this ability. So that's why in this course I'll pay specific attention to your practice, and since I don't have an opportunity to interact with you directly, I would really like to encourage you, in order for you to take maximum out of this course, to be as productive and as interactive with the positions that I'll be giving to you. Please, every time when I tell you to stop the video, do to take your time and think. You'll benefit immensely from this. So, getting into the topic. Calculation, of course, has a lot of subtopics into it. It involves the ability to calculate long direct lines, or ability to calculate well in complex positions when on each move sides have numerous possibilities. It involves seeing the unexpected moves, tactical tricks, and knowing many typical patterns, many things, of course. Obviously, we would not be able to cover all of those, and I would like us to get started by discussing the calculation technique and some of the well-known things that also strong players, even though mostly subconsciously because they already learned it really well, do use in their games. In order to, first of all, it's very important, even though it sounds funny, in order to spot the tactical win, you need to look for it. The problem is that many players really like to play, as you say, with their hands, and very often they prefer to blitz out moves and not think too deeply. Or if the position is complicated, they like to make a move that looks nice, even though it doesn't win direct, and as I understand it, they are either not confident about their calculation skills, or they are not willing to put enough effort in anyways. They don't benefit from the momentum. A lot, I think it's related quite a lot with the fact that they're simply not looking for it. So, the first thing that I would like us to speak about is the need to search for the most forcing moves in the position, if you're willing to find the tactical win. What are the forcing moves? Well, that's pretty well known. The forcing moves are mostly checks and captures. Also, forcing moves include moves that create threats, namely moves when you don't capture anything or don't declare a check, but your move creates a threat of something being captured or of something bad, which is about to happen to the opponent on the next move. But obviously this is a less concrete thing rather than captures and checks, and that's why I would like us to get started exactly with those two. Here on the board you see a position, and first of all, before you watch any further, I would like you to take your time and think. It's black's turn and black can win here directly. What would you do? Alright, I hope you did take your time, and now I'd like us to discuss this position. Hopefully you have found the solution, but first we'll talk about your thought process. I think it did take you some time and effort to solve it, and it didn't come to you instantly, the solution. So let us see what's going on. Of course, if you're willing to find a direct win, you need to have a feeling that the position's ready for it. To me, it does feel so. What are the reasons? By looking at the position, we can see that three black pieces are concentrated on the king side, which is exactly where the white king is. And even though the white king does have several defenders, it clearly looks like white's barely holding on. Also importantly, the white rook is not really in the game, it's not really participating in the defense, and it's not creating any threats on its own. And the white pieces are extremely passive, they're unable to deliver any counterplay. It clearly looks like black should be able to somehow benefit from the opportunities that he has on the king side. But how do we proceed from here? Of course, if you were to just if you didn't know that there was a forced win, you could have looked for possibilities how to involve more pieces in the game. For example, one of the things I did think of during the game, I would tell you it was my game, I thought, well, this rook is not playing, right? So maybe, and this is actually another very important idea, even though we're getting somewhat distracted from the topic of calculation, but I'm a firm believer that chess should be studied thoroughly and not separated into some specific topics if there's a possibility to mention some other interesting thing which is not related. So a very important thing which many strong players use to play well positionally is the idea of the worst piece. What is it? In many positions, you have a situation where it feels like you're doing well, but you are not really sure what your next move would look like. In these situations, it's usually extremely helpful to look at the position and think, what pieces don't work yet? And it becomes apparent that obviously the black rook is the only idle piece that doesn't really provide any value to black's position. So a thing I did think of was to just play king h8 or king h7 and then bring the rook to g8. And I thought, well, it would just increase the concentration of my pieces on the king side and should clearly be quite unpleasant for white. Well, first of all, of course, it's not a direct win. So, and I mean, during the game, I didn't know if there was a direct win or not. I had to figure it out. But I was quite alarmed because it felt like the fact that white has a pawn on c6 is somewhat disturbing, and if white gets to push it further, my rook would always need to guard it, and white could create counter threats himself, so I had to act quick. If that's the case, we start looking at the forcing lines. What are they? Well, for example, the moves that look forcing to me are of course knight h3 because it's a capture. There's also knight f2, which is a check, but this move, if we just think of it, doesn't really give anything. White can take back with the rook or with the queen and he'll be fine. So even though that's a forcing move, well, we can exclude it from our calculation pretty quickly, even though that's something to look at for sure. Another move that throws a piece in is knight f3. It adds one more piece visually to the, I would not say even to the attack because the knight's already on g5. It looks like it just moves it even further towards the opponent's king, and such moves usually also look nice and you look at them. Another thing that I did think about, of course, was once again the fact that the rook's not working. And when I had thrown away the idea of improving this rook gradually, I started thinking how to use it for the aggressive attacking purposes. And I think many of you have thought of this idea too. One of the moves that black has here, and that has to be calculated, is rook to b1. The point being that should white capture, black's able to take on h3. Now the white queen would not protect the knight anymore, just the bishop will. And maybe there would be something there. I think it's very important to notice such possibilities, and this is why throughout the course we'll go over several games with no concrete solutions where often such things don't work, but you'll just get a chance to spot more of them and just get a feel for this type of moves. And now I think it's important to actually start talking about the specific variations. So I started thinking here, and I felt that of course the two critical moves were knight takes h3, and after bishop h3 I couldn't really come up with anything but this move rook to b1, or I could play rook to b1 first. And that's another really important thing that I want to mention here. The move orders. We will get a chance to talk about it pretty soon. I hope those of you who haven't solved the position or who didn't come up with such moves as say knight h3 or rook b1 will take your time to think about it twice, once again, and reconsider your options. And I'll move on to talk about the solution. So I thought that after knight takes h3, white of course has to take, and now rook to b1. White can of course insert a check rook a8 or something. That doesn't really change the situation, though eventually he'll have to take. And after taking king g1, we have this position where the white queen is very far from the king. And obviously here I think you do see the instant win, but when you're calculating from well being far away from the position, I think it could be not that easy to spot what's going on. Here, as we can see, white loses because of the fact that the king as well as the queen are on the first rank, and black manages to win the queen like this. Actually, I moved on to even calculate this line a bit further. I thought white didn't. Doesn't white have this passer? So first I thought of c7, but I mean, of course I can take, and then first of all I can even checkmate white like this, for example. Or I can simply stop the pawn if I want with some queen c4, but mate is nicer. Or if white gives a check first and then c7. This looks a bit too much, I think. Most of you would say, well, there should be something, but usually when you are trying to play as well as you can, you want to avoid any surprises, so even though it's possible to stop after queen b1, and I think it's good enough for sure, but just as an example of perfect calculation, so to speak, I wanted to give this line just to show to you that everything is fine here. Here we have a check and then queen c7. It seems like black's winning in many ways, but I think it's extremely important to make yourself do even somewhat more work than you feel is needed, especially in the moments when you are about to close out the game and make your opponent resign. It's very important not to miss any nasty surprises. So this is what I had calculated. And then I started thinking, alright, wait, is there any difference? What if I go rook to b1 first and then knight h3? What is better? Does it have any nuances or subtleties or move order tricks? And actually that's the time when you can answer this question too. So hopefully you had spotted these ideas, and hopefully you also thought that this is exactly the win. But I would like you to answer which move do we start with, rook b1 or knight h3, and why? And actually, is there any difference or not? So unfortunately for black, if he wants to start with rook to b1, suddenly he loses. White can take, and after knight h3, the problem is, and actually this is a very important issue, which I think many players miss in their calculations, and that's the reason why they have the so-called bad luck that often. And well, unfortunately all of us of course do this. The problem is that very often when you're getting excited about calculating some line, you start looking only at the opponent's forcing moves too. When you do make a forcing move, you look at opponent's forcing answer only. You take, he takes back. You give a check, he runs it. Well, if he gives a check, okay, of course, he has to go somewhere. But if you take, you mostly think of him taking. But chess is not draughts, and it's possible not to capture back. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. If white takes, it transposes, white loses, but white has a check, unfortunately. And after any king move, bishop takes, and king g1, white is suddenly covering the square on h2. And the line simply doesn't work for us. I think that many of you might have fallen into this trap, and it's not surprising because I also almost fell into it. And I showed this position to several friends and students of mine, and many of them did blunder this thing with queen to b8 too. And as you can see, surprisingly, just because of missing one detail with the move order, black already loses instead of winning. Fortunately, in the game I did find the right move order and won. But as you can see, the position is pretty tricky, and things could have gone either way if I wasn't precise enough. And that brings me to one more very important issue. Very often, it happens so that you calculate a line, and you feel that the line is right. You spot the candidate moves, you see something very interesting, some really cool ideas, and you feel that you have enough dynamic potential, that your pieces should be active enough for you to deliver a combination that things should really work, but they don't. In these situations, I think it's very easy to get frustrated and give up on the possibilities that you had intended at first and opt for something else. Make a concession and make a move which is not forcing and miss a combination. But in such situations, a very, very useful technique, which I think is something you should definitely know about, is following. When you feel that the line is right, the moves in the line are right, but they don't work, very often it makes a whole lot of sense to change the order of moves in the line. What do I mean? Well, you just saw an example. In this position, we do spot the idea knight h3 and rook to b1, and it does work. But for example, if we started with rook to b1 and saw that check in the end and realized that the line is not working, we could have just given up on our idea to go for the combination and could have done something else. But in fact, it's very, very important to just notice that black can start with the other move and then it would work because white would not have this check. That's exactly how it works. And I think that's a really good example. Also, even though indeed there was some trick to spot, namely this idea queen h2, queen h1, picking the queen, I think that's a really good example of a situation when you're looking for the most forcing moves. It's getting as forcing as possible because the opponent really has no alternative. Whatever you do, he has to answer with the only moves. And that makes your life way easier because often in the games the opponents have many possibilities, and obviously then our calculation is getting quite messy. Let us take a look at a few more examples when the most direct move decided the game. Let us take a look at this one. We would go straight to the position where the tactics became possible. As I had said previously, I would really like you to think before moving on. What should white do? I hope that you have found the solution and smiled because it's really pretty, even though it's not too difficult. So it clearly looks like white has quite a threatening presence on the king side. The rook's on f3, keeping an eye on the black queen. The white knight's also here. The white queen is keeping an eye on g7, and the bishop is around there too, ready to jump somewhere at any point, creating additional threats, maybe to g7, maybe something else. Obviously, in such situations, you should really feel inclined to look for tactics. It should be very alarming for black at this point. But what do we do as white? Clearly, it doesn't look possible to, for example, move our bishop, because then black will win the knight. Or, if that's the case, we cannot really use the rook to attack the queen or say the pawn, right? So it's really crucial to start by the forcing moves here. I think white doesn't have that many possibilities even. If he wants to win right now, there are just a few forcing moves for him to consider. Basically, I would even say just one. What is it and what's going on there? Indeed, there's just one capture in this position. Namely, it is knight takes on f7. And now calculation starts making the difference. Black has many possibilities, unlike the previous example. He can take back with the queen, he can take back with the king, he can take the bishop, or he can even do something else, right? So, in such situations, it's important to just start going over the moves one by one, very calmly and without rushing. I think, however, there is one practical detail that I would like to mention. We'll get to this later, and right now I think we should just go over the candidates. It's pretty easy to see that if black takes back with the king, white can just take this bishop, and importantly, there would be a pin. Even though black doesn't lose a queen right now after bishop f5, black can unpin, but white just managed to have his bishop back, and obviously he won a pawn. He is about to collect one more, but that's already irrelevant for our calculation purposes. We won a pawn, at least we can stop here. We are not really under any attack, there are no threats to our king, nothing's happening, we're just a pawn up, that's good. If now black takes with the queen, the same problem occurs to him. There is an x-ray over the f-file, white just captures on d6 and wins a pawn. Again, black has to spend the time, he cannot take the bishop. Or, if black takes back on f4, then it's important that we can take back, and now the queen is attacked, and of course we have the time to move the knight and once again stay with our extra pawn. This, I think, is a pretty straightforward variation, which should not be too difficult to see. Even so, as you can see, black has 3 answers, which is quite a lot, but the variations are very simple themselves. So this tactics does work, and in the game, my opponent found a way to lose pretty quickly. Unfortunately for him, he could have done something else, but he went queen e7. And now queen to g6 creates a threat of knight h6, creates a threat of queen h5, and black has no defense to all the threats, so he chose to resign. That's quite unfortunate, of course, but I think that black, when he was placing the queen on f6 and allowing for all this, was not really careful, and that was the price for his ignorance. I wanted to mention this example because I think it clearly demonstrates how important it is to stay alert and look for tactics. Obviously, I could have made some other move. I don't know, maybe, let's say, knight d3, or knight c6, or rook e1, or king h2, or something else. And the position would have remained fine for me. Maybe I would have won as well. Maybe not. You never know. But importantly, I would have missed the momentum and I would not have won straight away. So a very important thing, even though it sounds kind of not chess related, but I think it really matters for gaining the much better results with your calculation and with the positions that require tactical work, is just your mental readiness to work hard. Unfortunately, many players, even in such promising positions, think that they have all the time in the world and prefer to just make any move by hand, like say knight d3 or rook e1 or something. And unfortunately for them, they miss out on an opportunity to close the game out straight away. And quite likely so, in the future they don't get another chance in this game. So I think that's a very, very important practical aspect. At the same time, I wanted to really stress on the following thing. Unfortunately, at the moment, well, let us maybe build this phrase differently. There is a great book by Alexander Kotov, which is called How to Become a Grandmaster, and it talks a lot about calculation. I actually wrote an article which you would find linked to this course, where I had described what I thought of this book and of the things that I'm about to mention, and I'll mention it once again. The book is really, really amazing. It was one of the first works that had basically described this process, how strong grandmasters tend to calculate, and how you should try to repeat this process as a club player. However, I think there is just one thing that I don't really agree with, and I wanted to stress it out. Maybe that's not the best position, not the best example, but I think it's a pretty good one. So basically, the main idea that the author talks about in this book is that when you choose your candidate moves, for example, after knight f7, you decide that black has a few possibilities, like king f7, or queen takes, or bishop f4. You start calculating them one by one, and once you calculated a move, you don't return to it. So when you realize that, let's say, queen f7 is losing, you say to yourself, fine, this is good enough, and then you start working with the other move. And basically, one of the features of this approach, of course, is that since you want to get your work done in one go and never return there, you try to calculate things as deeply as possible from the first attempt, because that's the only attempt you have. But I think there's one big problem with this approach, especially considering the reality of modern chess and modern chess tournaments, where the time given for the whole game is quite limited. The problem is that very often you would consider some sacrifice. Again, I don't think that's the best example to explain this principle on, but I think it's still a position where you can definitely understand very well what I'm talking about. So, for example, you start calculating the move, let's say king f7, and then you realize that you're winning, and you spend a lot of time to figure it out, and then you start looking at one more move, let's say bishop f4, and you realize you're winning too. And then you start calculating the last move, the third move for black. And then, after having spent 20 minutes on the previous two, you realize that in the third one, black just wins easily. Yeah, I mean, that's not the case here. Here we have discussed it white winning, but just to give an example, right? and you understand that your sacrifice makes no sense, and you cannot really execute it, and you just had wasted 20 minutes of your time. And unfortunately, if you're given, let's say, 90 for the whole game, or often even less, well, this can be decisive. You will inevitably make very, very bad moves in the time trouble, and you would lose. Or you just put yourself in a lot of stress. That's not something you want to do, really. So I think the better approach, practically nowadays, would be the following thing. First, you would do one, so to speak, round of delving in the position. You would look at it, you would look at all the three moves, and you would just evaluate that you believe that all of them are promising for you. And only then, when you realize that there is no refutation, so to speak, of your idea on move 1 for the opponent, you can go ahead and calculate all the moves one by one slowly. I think this is exactly how you will be able to optimize your performance in terms of your calculation and never end up in a situation where you waste a lot of time without really getting any result, and just to realize that your sacrifice is not working. So I think this is a really, really good example of forcing play. This example, as well as the previous ones that we had talked about, it talks about choosing the most forcing moves possible on the position. And we're going to see more of it in the next videos. We'll talk about a few more principles. We'll talk about spotting candidate moves, spotting the unexpected candidate moves, arriving at some unusual and unexpected candidate moves by logical thinking. There are moves that you cannot really find by just looking at the position at first. We'll talk about all of this in the next videos, and I think this was quite an important introduction, because even though there's a lot of practice which you really need to take in order to improve the skill of calculation, I think it's also very, very important to understand some of the general principles and try to work not just hard but also smart on your chess. And anytime when you make the decisions, either over the board or during the training, it's very important to rely on those critical principles and critical rules that all of strong players use. And these are the things which are not written specific precise rules, but these are the things that really make your decision making process way easier and smoother, and really, really decrease your chance of making a mistake and of getting yourself in a lot of stress. I'll see you in the next videos, and I think they'll be very, very intense, so get ready.